The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1875. As Pearl Ramirez ducked behind the overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The afternoon stage to Independence had been ambushed just 2 miles outside of town, and now she found herself caught in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Pearl's fingers trembled as she checked the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket. 2 bullets, barely enough to matter against the gang of outlaws who had surrounded the stage. Hand over the strongbox and nobody gets hurt. A gruff voice called out, followed by mocking laughter that sent chills down Pearl's spine. The driver was already dead, slumped over with a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, huddled together in terror behind the meager cover of the damaged stagecoach. Pearl knew they wouldn't last long. The outlaws were closing in, and the situation was growing desperate with each passing second. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats cut through the tension, and Pearl risked a glance over the edge of the wagon. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. He rode hard toward the ambush site, his dark duster billowing behind him like wings. As he drew closer, Pearl could make out the glint of a sheriff's badge on his chest. "It's Finley," one of the outlaws shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "Finley Blackett," the outlaws scattered, firing wildly as the newcomer charged into their midst. Pearl watched in awe as the man called Finley dismounted in one fluid motion, his Winchester rifle already in hand. He moved with deadly precision, returning fire only when necessary, each shot finding its mark. "Get down," he shouted to Pearl as he dove behind the wagon beside her, narrowly avoiding a bullet that splintered the wood where his head had been moments before. Pearl found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face framed by dark hair. Dust and gunsmoke clung to his clothing, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "Sheriff Finley Blackett," he said, tipping his hat slightly before peering around the edge of the wagon. "Looks like you folks picked a bad day for traveling." "Pearl Ramirez," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "And I'm beginning to think every day is a bad day for traveling in this territory." The corner of his mouth quirked upward in what might have been a smile. "Can't argue with that, you know how to use that." He nodded toward the derringer in her hand. "My father taught me, but I only have 2 shots. Then we'd best make them count." He handed her his revolver. "6 more here, stay low." The gunfire had intensified, and Pearl could hear the outlaws shouting to each other as they regrouped. Sheriff Blackett leaned out and fired twice in quick succession. A cry of pain told her he'd found his target. "3 left," he muttered. "They'll be coming around both sides. The older folks and that salesman won't last out in the open. We need to get them better cover." Pearl took a deep breath, fighting back the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "Tell me what to do." Finley studied her face for a moment, seeming to take measure of her courage. "I'll draw their fire. You get the others and head for those rocks." He pointed to a rocky outcropping about 50 yards away. "It's our best chance." "You'll be killed," Pearl protested. "Not if you're as good with that pistol as you claim to be." He flashed her a quick grin that somehow made the danger seem less immediate. "Ready." Before she could respond, Finley rolled away from the wagon and fired 3 rapid shots toward the outlaws. Pearl seized the moment, rushing to the other passengers and urging them toward the rocks. The elderly woman stumbled, and Pearl caught her, half carrying her as bullets kicked up dust at their feet. Pearl heard Finley's Winchester firing steadily behind them, providing cover as they fled. When they reached the relative safety of the rocks, Pearl turned to see Finley racing toward them, zigzagging to avoid the outlaws' bullets. He dove behind the rocks just as a volley of shots peppered the stone around them. "Everyone all right?" he asked, breathing heavily as he reloaded his rifle. Pearl nodded, suddenly aware that her hands were shaking. "Thanks to you." "Don't thank me yet," Finley replied grimly. "Those are the Clayton brothers out there. They don't give up easy, especially when there's a bank shipment at stake." Pearl's eyes widened. "How did you? I've been tracking them for days," Finley explained. "They hit the bank in Albuquerque last week, killed 2 people. Word came they were heading this way, likely to intercept the gold shipment bound for Independence." The elderly man spoke up, his voice quavering. "My wife needs medical attention. She has a heart condition." Finley's expression softened as he looked at the frightened couple. "We'll get you help, sir, but first we need to deal with these outlaws." As if on cue, a voice called out from behind a nearby boulder. "Hey, Sheriff. We got you outnumbered. Hand over the strongbox and we might let you live." "That's Ezra Clayton," Finley whispered to Pearl. "The oldest brother. The real dangerous one is Victor, the youngest. He's probably trying to circle around behind us." Pearl gripped the revolver tighter. "What's the plan?" Finley checked his ammunition. "Sun's setting fast. If we can hold out till nightfall, we might have a better chance of getting away. The moon's nearly full tonight should give us enough light to move without breaking our necks." For the next hour, they remained in a tense standoff. The outlaws would occasionally fire a shot to remind them they were still there, but they seemed content to wait as well. The traveling salesman introduced himself as Harold Jenkins from St. Louis, while the elderly couple were Martin and Beatrice Ward from Santa Fe. As dusk settled over the desert, Pearl found herself sitting close to Finley, their shoulders almost touching as they kept watch for any movement. "How'd you end up on that stagecoach?" Finley asked quietly. Pearl hesitated before answering. "I'm heading to Independence to take over my uncle's general store. He died last month and I'm his only living relative." "I'm sorry for your loss," Finley said sincerely. "Thank you. I barely knew him, to be honest. We exchanged letters over the years, but I haven't seen him since I was a child." Pearl sighed. "My parents died in a fever epidemic 2 years ago. The store is all I have now. Independence is a good town," Finley assured her. "Rough around the edges, but good people. I split my time between there and Silver Creek, about 20 miles south." "And how did you become a sheriff?" Pearl asked, curious about the man who had saved their lives. A shadow crossed Finley's face. "Lost my family to outlaws when I was 19. Decided then that I'd do whatever it took to stop men like that from hurting others." He paused, then added, "Been wearing this badge for 7 years now." Pearl calculated quickly. "So you're 26. 27 next month," Finley replied with a small smile. "And you?" 23 last spring." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of pebbles skittering down the slope behind them. Finley moved instantly, pushing Pearl down as a shot rang out. The bullet whizzed over their heads and struck the rock face, sending fragments of stone flying. "Victor," Finley muttered, spinning around and firing twice in the direction of the sound. A harsh cry confirmed he'd hit his target. "Vic." Ezra's voice rang out. "You kill my brother, Blackett, and I swear I'll skin you alive." "Your brother's still breathing, Ezra," Finley called back. "But he won't be for long without medical attention. This ends now." For a tense moment there was silence. Then Ezra's voice came again, lower and more dangerous. "This ain't over, Sheriff. Not by a long shot." The sound of retreating hoofbeats told them that at least some of the outlaws were leaving. Finley kept his rifle trained on the darkness, unwilling to trust the apparent reprieve. "They wouldn't just leave," Pearl whispered. "Not after all this." "No," Finley agreed. "Ezra's pulling back to regroup, probably going to wait for full dark, then try to rush us, or he's gone for reinforcements." "What do we do now?" Finley studied the terrain as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant mountains. "We need to move. There's an old line shack about 3 miles east of here. We can hold up there for the night, tend to Mrs. Ward, and head to Independence at first light." "But the outlaws, they'll be expecting us to make for town directly," Finley explained. "We'll take a different route, use the darkness to our advantage." Pearl helped Mrs. Ward to her feet while Finley assisted her husband. The traveling salesman, Jenkins, looked terrified but nodded resolutely when Finley outlined the plan. "Stay close," Finley instructed as they began their careful journey across the moonlit desert. "Watch your footing and keep noise to a minimum." They moved slowly, painfully aware of every snapping twig and displaced stone. Pearl supported Mrs. Ward, who was struggling to keep pace despite her determination. The moon rose higher in the sky, bathing the landscape in silvery light that made Pearl feel dangerously exposed. After nearly an hour of tense hiking, they paused in the shadow of a large rock formation. Mrs. Ward was breathing heavily, her face pale even in the moonlight. "Need to rest," she gasped, clutching her chest. Finley scanned their surroundings, his expression grim. "Just a few minutes." "We're still too exposed here." Pearl helped the elderly woman sit down, concerned by the rapid flutter of her pulse. "She needs water." "Here," Jenkins offered his canteen. "I filled it at the last stop." Mrs. Ward took small sips while her husband hovered anxiously. Pearl felt Finley's hand on her shoulder and turned to find him motioning for her to follow him a short distance away. "I don't think Mrs. Ward will make it all the way to the line shack," he said in a low voice. "And we're moving too slowly. The Claytons will catch up to us at this rate." "What are you suggesting?" Pearl asked. Though she suspected she already knew the answer, Finley met her gaze steadily. "I need to draw them away, give you folks a chance to reach safety." "That's suicide," Pearl hissed, grabbing his arm. "You said yourself there could be more than just Ezra out there." "I know these hills better than they do," Finley insisted. "I can lose them and circle back to meet you at the shack by morning." Pearl's grip tightened on his arm. "And if you don't?" Something flickered in Finley's eyes, something warm that made Pearl's heart beat faster despite their dire circumstances. "Then you get these good people to Independence and tell Marshal Williams what happened. He'll know what to do." "I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself," Pearl said firmly. "There has to be another way." Finley's expression softened. "You're something else, Miss Ramirez. Known you less than a day and already you're arguing with me like we're old friends." "Friends don't let friends ride to their death," Pearl countered. A faint sound in the distance made them both tense, the unmistakable rhythm of approaching horses. "No more time to argue," Finley said, checking his Winchester. "Get them to the line shack. It's just over that ridge down in the hollow by the old oak. Bar the door and don't open it for anyone but me." Before Pearl could protest further, Finley strode over to the others. "Change of plans. I'm going to lead the outlaws away. Pearl knows where to go, follow her instructions exactly. You can't leave us." Jenkins exclaimed, panic evident in his voice. "He's not leaving us," Pearl said firmly. "He's buying us time." She met Finley's gaze. "And he's coming back." Finley's mouth quirked in that almost smile again. "Yes, madam." He tipped his hat and was gone, slipping into the shadows like a ghost. Minutes later, they heard gunshots in the distance, followed by shouted curses. The sound of hoofbeats veered away to the north, away from their position. "Let's move," Pearl urged, helping Mrs. Ward to her feet, while they're distracted. They continued their journey with renewed urgency, the elderly couple somehow finding reserves of strength they hadn't shown before. Jenkins proved surprisingly helpful, supporting Mr. Ward when he stumbled on the uneven ground. The line shack appeared just where Finley had described it, a small, weathered structure nestled in a hollow beneath a massive oak tree. Its windows were boarded up, but the door yielded to Jenkins's shoulder after several hard pushes. Inside, they found a Spartan but serviceable shelter, a small wood stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs and a narrow cot along one wall. A shelf held some basic supplies, matches, a lantern with a little oil, some hard tack, and a few cans of beans. "Not exactly the Overland Hotel," Jenkins muttered as he helped the Wards to the cot. "It'll do," Pearl replied, barring the door with a heavy wooden beam that had been propped nearby, clearly intended for that purpose. "Mr. Jenkins, see if you can get a small fire going in that stove. It's getting cold, and Mrs. Ward needs warmth." As Jenkins busied himself with the stove, Pearl took stock of their situation. They had little food, less water, and were relying on a man she'd just met to outride and outshoot a gang of determined outlaws, then find his way back to them by morning. The odds weren't good, but Pearl refused to give in to despair. Her parents had raised her to face challenges head-on, and she wouldn't dishonor their memory by falling apart now. Besides, there was something about Sheriff Finley Blackett that inspired confidence. The way he had assessed the situation, protected them, planned their escape, all while maintaining a calm demeanor that helped keep everyone from panicking. Pearl found herself wondering about him, about the life he'd led and the losses he'd suffered. He'd mentioned losing his family to outlaws, and she could only imagine how that tragedy had shaped him. Yet despite whatever hardships he'd endured, he hadn't become bitter or cruel. Instead, he dedicated his life to protecting others, to preventing more families from experiencing the same pain. The night wore on, and Pearl took turns with Jenkins keeping watch through a crack in the boarded-up window. The Wards slept fitfully on the cot, Mrs. Ward's breathing concerning Pearl with its occasional rasping quality. Outside, the desert was quiet except for the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. As the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky, Pearl's anxiety grew. Finley should have returned by now. Had the outlaws caught him? Was he lying wounded somewhere in the vast desert, unable to reach them? The sound of approaching hoofbeats made everyone in the shack freeze. Jenkins grabbed a rusted poker from beside the stove, holding it like a club. Pearl drew the revolver Finley had given her, moving to position herself between the door and the Wards. "Who's there?" She called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's Finley," came the welcome reply. "Open up, Pearl." Relief flooded through her, but caution kept her from immediately removing the bar. "How do I know it's really you?" A low chuckle sounded from outside. "Smart woman. You're 23 last spring, heading to Independence to take over your uncle's store. And I still owe you an explanation about how I became a sheriff." Pearl nodded to Jenkins, who helped her remove the heavy bar. She pulled the door open to find Finley leaning against the doorframe, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. His clothing was torn in several places, and dried blood stained his left sleeve. "You're hurt," Pearl said, holstering the revolver and reaching for him. "It's just a graze," Finley assured her, though he winced when she helped him inside. "The important thing is I lost them, doubled back through the dry creek bed and circled around to the east. They headed north, thinking I was making for Silver Creek." "Sit down before you fall down," Pearl ordered, guiding him to one of the chairs. She turned to Jenkins. "Is there any water left?" "A little," the salesman replied, handing over his canteen. Pearl tore a strip from her petticoat and used it to clean Finley's wound. It was indeed just a graze, but it had bled significantly, and she worried about infection. "The Wards?" Finley asked, his eyes moving to the couple on the cot. "Mrs. Ward is stable but weak," Pearl replied. "She needs a doctor as soon as possible." Finley nodded grimly. "We'll head out as soon as it's fully light. Independence is about 5 miles southwest of here. With any luck, we can make it by mid-morning." "And the Claytons?" Jenkins asked nervously. "They'll figure out I've doubled back eventually," Finley admitted. "But they won't know where to look for us, and they've got a wounded man to tend to. I think we've bought enough time." Pearl finished bandaging Finley's arm and sat back, studying his face. Despite his obvious exhaustion, his eyes were alert, constantly assessing their situation. "You should rest," she told him, "even if it's just for an hour." Finley shook his head. "Can't risk it. We need to move soon." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished pocket watch. "My father's," he explained when he caught Pearl staring at it. "One of the few things I have left of him." There was a story there, Pearl knew, but now wasn't the time to ask. Instead, she helped Jenkins prepare a meager breakfast from the supplies they'd found. They shared the food in silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts as the dawn grew brighter outside. When the sun had fully risen, they prepared to leave. The Wards were weak but determined, and Jenkins had proven himself more resourceful than his initial panic had suggested. Finley's horse, a sturdy bay gelding, would carry Mrs. Ward while the rest of them would walk. "Stay close," Finley instructed as they set out. "The terrain is rough, but it's the safest route to town." They made steady progress through the morning, Finley setting a pace that balanced urgency with consideration for their less hardy members. Pearl found herself walking beside him for much of the journey, drawn to his quiet strength and watchful presence. "Tell me about independence," she said as they navigated a rocky stretch. "If I'm going to live there, I should know what to expect." Finley's expression lightened somewhat. "It's grown a lot in the past few years. The silver mines brought in the first wave, then the railroad last year brought more. It's a proper town now, church, school, even a small theater. Your uncle's store is right on Main Street, one of the first businesses established there. And the people, a mix like most frontier towns. Some rough elements, especially when the miners come in on payday, but most are decent folk just trying to make a life for themselves." Finley glanced at her. "They'll welcome you, especially once they get to know you." "I hope so," Pearl said softly. "It's a big change from Santa Fe." "Change can be good," Finley offered. "New beginnings and all that." Pearl was about to reply when Finley suddenly stiffened, holding up a hand to halt the group. He pointed to a ridge about half a mile ahead where 3 riders had appeared, silhouetted against the sky. "Clayton's," he muttered. "They've cut us off." "How did they find us?" Jenkins asked, his voice cracking with fear. "Must have figured out where we were headed and circled around," Finley said grimly. "We're still about 2 miles from town and they're between us and Independence." Pearl felt her heart sink. They'd come so far, endured so much, only to be cornered when safety was almost within reach. "What now?" she asked, fighting to keep the desperation from her voice. Finley studied the terrain, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "There's a ravine about a quarter-mile east of here. It runs close to town, might give us cover most of the way. And if they spot us before we reach it," Finley's hand moved to his Winchester, "then I'll have to give you folks a head start again." "No," Pearl said firmly. "We stay together this time." Their eyes met and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. Finley nodded slowly. "Together, then. Let's move before they spot us." They changed direction, keeping low and using the scrubby vegetation for cover as they headed toward the ravine. They had nearly reached it when a shout echoed across the desert. "There they are. Get them!" Gunfire erupted behind them as the Claytons spurred their horses forward. Finley pushed Mrs. Ward and her husband toward the ravine, then turned to face the oncoming outlaws, rifle raised. "Go," he shouted to Pearl and Jenkins. "Get them to safety." But Pearl didn't move. Instead, she drew the revolver and stood beside Finley, her jaw set in determination. "I told you together." Finley's expression flickered between exasperation and admiration before settling into grim resolve. "Stay behind me and make your shots count." Jenkins hesitated, then rushed back to join them, still clutching the iron poker from the line shack. "3 against 3, he said, his voice shaking but determined. "Even odds." The outlaws closed the distance rapidly, firing as they rode. Finley knelt and took careful aim, squeezing off a shot that struck the lead rider's horse. The animal went down, throwing its rider hard to the ground. The other 2 outlaws veered away, seeking cover among the rocks that dotted the landscape. "Ezra's down," Finley said, keeping his rifle trained on the fallen outlaw. "But he's still moving." Pearl could see the man struggling to his feet, blood staining one leg of his trousers. The other 2 outlaws had dismounted and were using their horses as shields as they advanced cautiously. "They're trying to flank us," Finley warned. "Pearl, watch the one on the right. Jenkins, stay with the Wards." Pearl steadied her breathing as she aimed the revolver at the outlaw, edging around a large boulder to their right. When he leaned out to fire, she squeezed the trigger. Her shot went wide, but it was close enough to send the man ducking back behind cover. Finley was exchanging fire with Ezra, who had crawled behind his fallen horse. The 3rd outlaw was working his way around to their left, trying to cut off their escape route to the ravine. "We can't stay here," Pearl said urgently. "They'll have us surrounded." Finley fired again, his shot grazing Ezra's shoulder and drawing a howl of pain from the outlaw leader. "We need to get to those rocks," he said, nodding toward a cluster of large boulders about 50 yards to their right. "Better cover there." "The wards won't make it," Pearl pointed out. "They're barely on their feet as it is." Finley's jaw tightened as he assessed their options. "Then we make our stand here." A bullet whizzed past Pearl's ear, so close she felt the disturbed air on her cheek. Finley pulled her down beside him, his body partially shielding hers as he returned fire. "If we can hold them off until someone from town hears the shooting, we might have a chance," he told her. "Independence isn't that far." But Pearl knew the odds were against them. The outlaws were well armed and determined, and help might not come in time. If they were going to survive, they needed to change the dynamics of this confrontation. An idea struck her, desperate and risky, but possibly their only chance. "Finley," she whispered, "what if we convince them we have something they want more than revenge?" Finley glanced at her questioningly. "Like what?" "The gold shipment. What if we told them it wasn't in the strong box, that it's hidden somewhere only you know about?" Understanding dawned in Finley's eyes. "A bluff," Pearl nodded. "It might buy us time, get them talking instead of shooting." Finley considered for a moment, then nodded. "Worth a try, follow my lead." He raised his voice to carry across the battlefield. "Ezra, this doesn't need to end with more bloodshed." There was a pause in the gunfire. "Little late for that, Sheriff," Ezra called back. "You shot my brother." "Your brother shot at us first," Finley replied. "And he's still alive, which is more than I can say for the stagecoach driver your men killed." "What's your point, Blackett?" Finley took a deep breath. "My point is, you're not getting what you came for. The gold wasn't in the strong box." A tense silence followed this statement. Then Ezra's voice, suspicious but interested. "What are you talking about?" "It was a decoy," Finley continued. "The real shipment is hidden. I'm the only one who knows where. You kill us, you'll never find it." Pearl held her breath, watching the rocks where Ezra was hidden. "Would he take the bait? You expect me to believe that?" Ezra finally called back. "Sounds like the desperate lies of a man about to die." "Think about it, Ezra," Finley pressed. "Why would I be out here alone if I didn't know something was going to happen? The bank's been expecting trouble. They're not fools." There was muttered conversation among the outlaws, too low for Pearl to hear. Then Ezra spoke again. "Prove it. Tell me where the gold is, and maybe we let the women and the old folks go." "That's not how this works," Finley replied. "You and your men throw down your weapons and surrender. I'll put in a word with the judge, tell him you let these innocent people live when you could have killed them." More muttering, followed by a harsh laugh from Ezra. "You must think I'm stupid, Sheriff. I know what happens to men who shoot lawmen in this territory." "Better a fair trial than dying out here in the dirt," Finley countered. The standoff continued, neither side willing to concede. Pearl could see Finley's mind working, calculating angles and possibilities. The sun beat down mercilessly as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then a new sound reached them, multiple horses approaching from the direction of Independence. Finley tensed, listening intently. "Cavalry." Pearl whispered hopefully. Finley shook his head. "Too few, probably just travelers." But it was enough to distract the outlaws. One of them peered out from cover to look toward the new arrivals, giving Finley the opening he needed. He fired quickly, his bullet finding its mark in the outlaw's shoulder. The man dropped his rifle, cursing loudly. The distraction allowed Pearl to spot the third outlaw trying to circle behind them. She aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. Her shot struck him in the leg, sending him tumbling to the ground. "Good shot," Finley said appreciatively. "That leaves just Ezra." As if on cue, Ezra Clayton stood up from behind his dead horse, hands raised. "Don't shoot, I surrender." Finley kept his rifle trained on the outlaw leader. "Throw your gun away and walk toward me slowly." Ezra complied, limping forward with his hands still raised. But Pearl saw something in his eyes that made her uneasy, a calculating gleam that didn't match his posture of surrender. "Finley," she warned. Before she could finish, Ezra lunged forward, a hidden derringer appearing in his hand as if by magic. He fired at Finley, who jerked sideways but not quickly enough to avoid the bullet entirely. Finley fell back, clutching his side as Ezra aimed for a second shot. Pearl didn't hesitate. She raised the revolver and fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot missed, but the second struck Ezra squarely in the chest. He staggered backward, shock registering on his face before he collapsed to the ground. Finley. Pearl rushed to the sheriff's side, her heart in her throat as she saw blood staining his shirt. "How bad is it?" Finley grimaced in pain but managed to sit up. "Just a graze. Again. I'm starting to think these Clayton boys can't shoot straight." Relief washed over Pearl, so intense it left her shaking. She helped Finley to his feet as Jenkins approached cautiously. "Is it over?" the salesman asked, looking nervously at the fallen outlaws. "It's over," Finley confirmed, leaning on Pearl for support. "2 wounded, 1 dead. We need to get to town and send a wagon back for them." The sound of approaching riders grew louder, and this time 4 mounted men appeared, rifles ready. Pearl recognized the glint of badges on their chests. "That's Marshal Williams from Independence," Finley said with evident relief. "And his deputies." The lawmen quickly assessed the situation, securing the wounded outlaws and confirming Ezra Clayton's death. Marshal Williams, a grizzled veteran with a thick mustache, dismounted to speak with Finley. "Heard the shooting from town," he explained. "Figured someone was in trouble." He eyed Finley's blood-stained shirt. "Looks like we were right." "Your timing could have been better," Finley remarked dryly, "but I'm not complaining." Williams nodded toward Pearl. "And who's this?" "Pearl Ramirez," Finley replied with unmistakable respect in his voice. "She's new to Independence, taking over her uncle's store. She's also the reason we're all still breathing." Williams tipped his hat to Pearl. "Madam, sounds like we owe you our thanks." Pearl shook her head. "Sheriff Blackett is being generous. He's the one who saved us from the stagecoach ambush. And you're the one who just put a bullet in Ezra Clayton when he would have finished me off," Finley countered. "I'd say we're even." The deputies helped the wards onto their horses, promising to get them to the town doctor as quickly as possible. Jenkins mounted behind one of the lawmen, looking eager to put the entire ordeal behind him. Marshal Williams turned to Finley. "Can you ride, or do you need a wagon?" "I can ride," Finley insisted, though Pearl could see the pain in his eyes. "But I'll need a little help getting on my horse." As the lawmen organized their departure, Pearl found herself standing alone with Finley for a moment. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, leaving her oddly vulnerable in its wake. "You saved my life," Finley said softly. "I won't forget that." Pearl met his gaze steadily. "We saved each other. Isn't that what you meant by together?" A slow smile spread across Finley's face, a real smile this time, not the guarded half-version she'd seen before. "Yes," he agreed. "That's exactly what I meant." As they prepared to leave for Independence, the desert stretching vast and golden around them, Pearl realized that her new life was beginning in a way she could never have anticipated. She had come west seeking a fresh start, a place to build something of her own after losing her family. Instead, she had found danger, adventure, and a connection with a man unlike any she had known before. Whatever awaited her in Independence, Pearl knew one thing with certainty. This was just the beginning of her story with Finley Blackett. The ride to Independence was slow but uneventful. Finley insisted he could manage on his own, but Pearl noticed how he occasionally pressed a hand to his side. His face tightening with pain he tried to conceal. Marshal Williams and his deputies kept a vigilant watch as they transported the wounded outlaws, who had been disarmed and bound to their saddles. As they crested a final rise, the town of Independence came into view, a collection of wooden buildings and a few brick structures nestled in a valley with the mountains rising behind them. Pearl felt a flutter of anticipation at the sight. This would be her home now. "That's your uncle's store," Finley said, pointing to a 2-story building on the main street. "Ramirez General Merchandise, been a fixture in Independence since the town was founded." Pearl studied the building with interest. It was larger than she had expected, with a wide porch across the front and large display windows. Even from a distance, she could see it was well maintained, the sign freshly painted. "It looks substantial," she remarked, surprised. Her uncle's letters had been modest about his business. "Your uncle built it from nothing," Finley told her. "Started with a tent and a wagon, ended up with the best stock store in the county. He was proud of it and proud that you were coming to take it over." "You knew him well?" Pearl asked, curious about this connection. Finley nodded. Everyone knew Eduardo Ramirez. He was on the town council, helped fund the school, always extended credit to families having a hard time. He glanced at Pearl. "He talked about you often. Said his niece in Santa Fe had more business sense at 20 than most men twice her age." Pearl felt a pang of regret that she hadn't made the journey sooner, that she'd never have the chance to know this uncle who had thought so highly of her. "I hope I can live up to his expectations." "You will," Finley said with quiet confidence. "Anyone who can keep their head while being shot at by the Clayton gang can handle running a store in Independence." Their conversation ended as they entered the town, immediately drawing attention from the locals. People emerged from businesses and homes to watch the procession, whispers spreading rapidly as they recognized the wounded sheriff and the captured outlaws. Marshal Williams led them directly to the doctor's office, where Mrs. Ward was immediately taken inside, followed by her husband. The doctor, a harried-looking man with spectacles, frowned at the sight of Finley's blood-stained shirt. "Again, Sheriff Blackett, I swear you're single-handedly keeping me in business." "Sorry, Doc," Finley replied with a rueful smile. "Wasn't exactly my choice." "It never is," the doctor sighed. "Come on back. Let's see how bad it is this time." Pearl watched as Finley dismounted carefully and followed the doctor inside. Marshal Williams approached her as his deputies led the wounded outlaws toward the jailhouse. "Miss Ramirez, we'll need your statement about what happened out there, but it can wait until you've had a chance to rest and get settled." He gestured toward the general store. "Mayor Thompson has been looking after your uncle's place since he passed. He's got the keys and the papers you'll need." "Thank you, Marshal," Pearl replied. "I appreciate your consideration. Least we can do, considering what you've been through." Williams tipped his hat. "Welcome to Independence, Miss Ramirez. Despite today's excitement, it's generally a peaceful town." Pearl couldn't help but smile. "I'm beginning to think my definition of peaceful might need some adjustment out here," the marshal chuckled. "You might be right about that. Town hall's just down the street if you need anything. Mayor's usually there until sundown." As Williams departed, Pearl stood alone in the dusty street, her belongings lost in the stagecoach attack, in a town where she knew no one except an injured sheriff. Yet strangely, she didn't feel afraid or overwhelmed. If anything, she felt more alive than she had in the 2 years since losing her parents. A woman approached from a nearby dress shop, her friendly face creased with concern. "You must be Eduardo's niece," she said warmly. "I'm Harriet Morgan. I own the dress shop and I was a good friend of your uncle's." "Pearl Ramirez," Pearl confirmed, extending her hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Morgan. Call me Harriet, dear, everyone does." She took Pearl's hand in both of hers. "I heard about the trouble on the road. Terrible business with those Clayton boys, but I see Finley got you here safely, more or less." "He did," Pearl acknowledged. "Though I think he's the one who got the worst of it." Harriet nodded knowingly. "That's Finley for you, always putting himself between trouble and innocent folk." She looked Pearl up and down, noting her travel-worn clothing and general dishevelment. "You look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal. My place is just above the shop and I've got a spare room. Your uncle's living quarters at the store need a good airing out before you move in." Pearl was touched by the kind offer. "That's very generous of you." "Nonsense," Harriet said briskly. "It's what neighbors do. Besides, Eduardo would haunt me if I didn't look after his niece properly." She linked her arm through Pearl's. "Come along. You can visit the mayor after you've freshened up." The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions and new experiences. Harriet's hospitality was generous and unobtrusive, providing Pearl with a much-needed bath, clean clothes borrowed from her own wardrobe, and a hearty meal. Afterward, she accompanied Pearl to the town hall, where Mayor Thompson welcomed her warmly and handed over the keys and legal papers to her uncle's store. Eduardo left everything in perfect order, the mayor explained as Pearl examined the documents. The store's been closed since he passed, but we've kept it clean and checked regularly for any problems. You'll find the inventory ledgers in the safe in his office. Combinations there in that sealed envelope. Pearl felt a surge of gratitude for her uncle's foresight and for the town's respectful handling of his business in the interim. "Thank you for taking such care with my uncle's property, Mayor Thompson. Eduardo was one of our most respected citizens," the mayor replied. "It was the least we could do." He hesitated, then added, "I should mention that there have been several inquiries about purchasing the store since your uncle's passing. The railroad has brought new opportunities to Independence, and some of the business owners from larger towns are looking to expand here." Pearl's spine stiffened slightly. "I have no intention of selling. My uncle wanted me to continue his business, and that's exactly what I plan to do." The mayor's expression was carefully neutral. "Of course. I simply thought you should be aware of the interest should your circumstances change." After concluding their business at the town hall, Harriet suggested they visit the store so Pearl could see her new property. As they approached the building, Pearl felt a curious mixture of anticipation and sadness. This was her inheritance, but it had come at the cost of never knowing the man who had built it. The interior of the store was dim with the shutters closed, but Pearl could see it was impressively well stocked and organized. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with everything from tools and hardware to fabrics and household goods. Glass display cases contained more expensive items: jewelry, watches, fine cutlery. "Your uncle believed in carrying a little of everything," Harriet explained as Pearl wandered through the store. "Said it saved folks from having to make the long trip to Santa Fe or Albuquerque just for necessities." At the back of the main floor, a door led to a small office. Inside, Pearl found a solid desk, account books neatly arranged on shelves, and a cast-iron safe in the corner. Another door led to a staircase ascending to the second floor. "Living quarters are up there," Harriet said. 3 rooms, bedroom, sitting room, and a small kitchen, not fancy but comfortable. Eduardo was a practical man. Pearl nodded, running her hand along the smooth surface of the desk. "Did he have any close friends in town, besides you, I mean?" "Quite a few," Harriet replied. "He was well liked. Played chess with Dr. Miller every Thursday. Attended council meetings with the mayor, and he and Sheriff Blackett had a standing dinner once a month." She smiled at Pearl's surprised expression. They were an unlikely pair, but they respected each other, both men of principle. Pearl found herself curious about this connection between her uncle and Finley. It seemed their paths had been destined to cross even before the stagecoach attack. As they left the store, Pearl caught sight of a familiar figure across the street. Finley was emerging from the doctor's office, his torso now wrapped in fresh bandages visible beneath his partially buttoned shirt. He moved stiffly, but appeared otherwise alert as he spoke with Marshal Williams on the boardwalk. Harriet noticed the direction of Pearl's gaze. "Looks like our sheriff survived his latest encounter with a bullet," she observed. "That man has more lives than a cat." "Does he get shot at often?" Pearl asked, concerned by this implication. "Often enough," Harriet replied with a sigh. "He takes his duties seriously, too seriously, some might say. Doesn't know how to back down when he should." Pearl watched as Finley shook hands with the marshal and turned in their direction. When he spotted Pearl, his pace quickened slightly despite his obvious discomfort. "Miss Ramirez," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Morgan, good to see you both." "Sheriff," Harriet replied with a knowing smile, "I see Dr. Miller patched you up again." "Good as new," Finley claimed, though the tightness around his eyes belied his casual tone, "or close enough." "I was just showing Pearl her uncle's store," Harriet explained. "She'll be staying with me tonight while we air out the living quarters." Finley nodded. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Morgan." He turned to Pearl. "How do you find Independence so far?" Everyone's been very welcoming, Pearl said honestly, though I haven't exactly seen the town under normal circumstances. It grows on you, Finley assured her. Once you get past the dust and the occasional outlaw. Harriet glanced between them, her expression thoughtful. Sheriff, why don't you join us for supper tonight? Pearl's had quite an introduction to frontier life. Might be good for her to hear more about the town from someone who keeps the peace around here. Finley hesitated, looking uncertain. I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, Harriet insisted. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. With that, she excused herself to return to her shop, leaving Pearl and Finley standing somewhat awkwardly on the boardwalk. You don't have to come if you're not feeling up to it, Pearl said, noting how Finley was favoring his injured side. I'd like to come, Finley replied quietly, if you don't mind the company. I'd welcome it, Pearl admitted. It seems we have a lot to talk about, including how you knew my uncle. A shadow crossed Finley's face. Eduardo was a good man, one of the best I've known. He helped me through a difficult time when I first came to Independence. He paused, then added, I owe him a debt I can never repay. Looking out for his niece is the least I can do. I don't need looking out for, Pearl said, though without rancor. But I would appreciate hearing about my uncle from someone who knew him well. Finley's expression softened. 7 o'clock then. He tipped his hat again and turned to leave, but stopped after a few steps. Pearl, yes. What you did out there in the desert facing down the Claytons, saving my life, that took real courage. His eyes held hers. Your uncle would have been proud. Before Pearl could respond, Finley continued down the street, leaving her with a curious warmth spreading through her chest despite the cooling evening air. The supper at Harriet's home that evening proved to be a pleasant surprise. Harriet was an excellent cook, and her small dining room was cozy and welcoming. Finley arrived precisely at 7, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes, though Pearl noticed he still moved carefully to avoid aggravating his wound. The conversation flowed easily as they ate, with Harriet and Finley sharing stories about Independence and its colorful residents. Pearl learned about the town's founding during the Silver Rush 15 years earlier, its near abandonment when the mines began to play out, and its revival with the coming of the railroad. Your uncle was one of the few who stayed through the lean years, Finley told Pearl. Said he believed in independence even when others were leaving. He was stubborn that way, Harriet added affectionately, but he was right in the end. The town bounced back stronger than before. As the evening progressed, Harriet tactfully retired to her sitting room with her needlework, leaving Pearl and Finley to continue their conversation over coffee at the dining table. Tell me about your parents, Finley said once they were alone. Your uncle mentioned them occasionally, but never in detail. Pearl traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. My father was Eduardo's younger brother. He was a bookkeeper for a trading company in Santa Fe. My mother taught at the mission school. She smiled at the memories. They were ordinary people in many ways, but extraordinary to me. They taught me to read and write in both English and Spanish, to keep accounts, to value education and hard work. They sound like fine people, Finley said sincerely. They were. Pearl's smile faded. When the fever came through Santa Fe 2 years ago, they were among the first to fall ill. They were helping at the hospital, you see, always thinking of others before themselves. Finley nodded, understanding in his eyes. Like their daughter. Pearl looked up, surprised by the compliment. I'm just trying to live by their example, and succeeding from what I've seen. Finley set down his coffee cup. Your uncle was the same way. During my first year as sheriff, there was a drought that hit the local farmers hard. Eduardo extended credit to every family, knowing some might never be able to repay him. When I asked him why he would take such a risk, he said, a business that profits only its owner isn't worth having. Pearl felt a swell of pride hearing about her uncle's generosity. I wish I had known him better. He knew you, Finley assured her. Through your letters, he kept everyone. This revelation touched Pearl deeply. He did, in a box in his desk, Finley confirmed. He would read them to me sometimes during our dinners together. He especially liked the ones where you described helping your father with the bookkeeping or your mother at the school. Said you had both your parents' best qualities. Pearl blinked back unexpected tears. You must think me terribly emotional. I think you're someone who feels deeply, Finley corrected gently. There's no shame in that. Their eyes met across the table, and Pearl felt a connection forming between them, something based not just on their shared experience in the desert, but on a mutual recognition of something kindred in each other. The moment was interrupted by Harriet returning to clear the coffee cups. It's getting late, she observed, and both of you have had quite an ordeal. Perhaps we should continue this another time. Finley stood, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injury. You're right, Mrs. Morgan. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. Nonsense, Harriet replied warmly. It's been a pleasure having you, Sheriff. We should do this more often. As Finley prepared to leave, Pearl walked with him to the door. Thank you for coming tonight, she said, and for telling me about my uncle. It was my pleasure, Finley replied. I'll stop by the store tomorrow if you'd like help you get acquainted with things. I'd appreciate that, Pearl said, surprised by how much she was looking forward to seeing him again. Finley hesitated at the doorway, seemed to want to say something more but uncertain how to proceed. Finally, he simply tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Ramirez. Pearl, she corrected him. After everything we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Good night, Pearl. Good night, Finley. As she closed the door behind him, Pearl was aware of Harriet watching her with knowing eyes. He's a good man, the older woman remarked casually. Not many like him left. Yes, Pearl agreed, finding she couldn't disagree with either observation. He is. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Pearl settled into her new life in Independence. She reopened the store after a thorough cleaning and familiarized herself with the inventory and accounts. To her surprise, her uncle's business was even more successful than she had imagined, with regular customers from as far as 30 miles away. True to his word, Finley stopped by frequently, initially offering assistance but increasingly just to talk. Pearl found herself looking forward to his visits, enjoying his dry humor and thoughtful insights. Despite his dangerous profession, there was a gentleness to him that few seemed to notice, a kindness that showed in small gestures and quiet words. As spring deepened into summer, Pearl became a familiar figure in Independence. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, attended church services, and gradually made friends among the townspeople. Her natural business acumen and fair dealing earned her the respect her uncle had enjoyed, and the store continued to thrive under her management. Finley's duties as sheriff often took him away from town for days at a time, patrolling the territory and upholding the law in the smaller settlements that fell under his jurisdiction. Each time he returned, he made a point of stopping at Ramirez General Merchandise, sometimes with small gifts collected on his travels, a unique stone, an interesting book, once even a puppy rescued from an abandoned homestead. He needs a home, Finley had explained as the wriggling brown puppy licked Pearl's face enthusiastically. Thought he might keep you company when I'm not around to do it myself. The casual admission that he considered himself her company had made Pearl's heart flutter in a way she hadn't experienced before. She named the dog Ranger and welcomed him into both the store and her growing affection. By midsummer, it was common knowledge in Independence that Sheriff Blackett had developed more than a passing interest in Miss Ramirez. The townsfolk watched their courtship with approval and not a little satisfaction, as many had worried about their solitary sheriff's tendency toward melancholy when not actively engaged in his duties. For Pearl, life had taken an unexpected but welcome turn. She had come to Independence seeking only a fresh start and a way to honor her uncle's legacy. Instead, she had found a community, a purpose, and a man whose quiet strength and integrity increasingly captivated her heart. One warm July evening, Finley invited Pearl to ride with him to Cottonwood Creek, a picturesque spot a few miles outside of town. They packed a simple picnic and set out just before sunset, Ranger trotting happily alongside their horses. The creek was as beautiful as Finley had described, with ancient cottonwood trees providing shade along its banks and wildflowers dotting the surrounding meadow. They spread a blanket near the water and enjoyed their meal as the sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "This is lovely," Pearl said, leaning back on her elbows to admire the view. "How did you find this place?" "I camp here sometimes when I'm on patrol," Finley replied. "It's peaceful, helps me think." "And what do you think about?" Pearl asked, genuinely curious. Finley was silent for a moment, his eyes on the rippling water of the creek. "The past, the future, what might have been and what might still be," he glanced at Pearl. "Lately, mostly the future." There was something in his tone that made Pearl's pulse quicken. "Oh. And what do you see in this future of yours?" Finley turned to face her fully, his expression unusually vulnerable. "That depends on you." "On me," Pearl echoed, though she thought she knew where this conversation was leading. "Pearl," Finley began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. He took a deep breath and started again. "When I first met you, bullets were flying and outlaws were trying to kill us. Not exactly ideal circumstances for making a good impression." Pearl smiled at the understatement. "I thought you made a very good impression, actually. Not everyone can remain so calm while being shot at." "Professional hazard," Finley dismissed with a small smile of his own. "But what I'm trying to say is, despite those circumstances, or maybe because of them, I saw something in you that day. A strength, a courage, a heart that doesn't back down from challenges." He reached for her hand. "The more I've come to know you these past months, the more certain I've become that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Pearl's breath caught in her throat. "Finley, let me finish," he requested gently, "before I lose my nerve." When Pearl nodded, he continued, "I know we haven't known each other long, at least not by some standards, and I know my profession isn't an easy one to build a life around. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel whole in a way I haven't since I lost my family. You make me want to be better, a better sheriff, a better man." He released her hand only long enough to reach into his pocket and withdraw a small velvet box. "I'm not good with fancy words or grand gestures, Pearl. But if you do me the honor of becoming my wife, I promise to spend every day trying to make you as happy as you've made me." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. It caught the last rays of the setting sun, sending prisms of light dancing across the blanket. Pearl stared at the ring, momentarily speechless with emotion. When she had boarded that stagecoach to Independence 3 months ago, she could never have imagined this moment. Yet somehow, it felt right, as if all the paths in her life had been leading her to this place, this man. "Yes," she said finally, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Finley, I will marry you." The joy that transformed Finley's face was something Pearl knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then drew her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. As dusk deepened around them, they remained by the creek, making plans for their shared future. Finley would continue as sheriff, at least for now, while Pearl ran the store. They would live in the rooms above the store initially, but hoped to build a proper house on a piece of land Finley owned at the edge of town. "It has a view of the mountains," Finley told her, "and plenty of space for a garden, maybe even children someday if you want that." "I do," Pearl said softly, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Though I think Ranger might get jealous of the competition." Finley laughed, the sound warm and relaxed in a way Pearl had rarely heard from him. "He'll adapt. Dogs are good that way." As they packed up their picnic in the growing darkness, Pearl felt a contentment she had not known was possible after the losses she had suffered. She had come west seeking merely a new beginning. Instead, she had found a new family, a place where she belonged, and a love that had been born in danger but would thrive in peace. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Independence, met with universal approval and no small amount of celebration. Harriet Morgan immediately volunteered to help with wedding preparations, while Mayor Thompson offered the use of the town hall for the ceremony. They set the date for September, when the worst of the summer heat would have passed and before the unpredictable autumn weather could interfere with guests traveling from outlying areas. Pearl wrote to her few remaining relatives in Santa Fe, inviting them to attend, while Finley contacted his former partner from his days as a Texas Ranger. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Pearl divided her time between running the store and preparing for her new life as Mrs. Blackett. Finley continued his duties as sheriff, but arranged for a deputy to cover for him so he could take Pearl on a wedding trip to Santa Fe afterward. 2 weeks before the wedding, however, their plans were threatened by news that reached Independence via telegraph. A gang of outlaws had been terrorizing settlements along the New Mexico-Colorado border, working their way southward with increasing violence. Marshal Williams received orders to organize a posse to intercept them before they could reach the more populated areas around Independence and Santa Fe. "I have to go," Finley told Pearl regretfully as they sat in her living room above the store. "Williams needs experienced men, and this gang sounds dangerous. 8 men, all armed, and they've already killed 3 people that we know of." Pearl felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach, but she kept her expression calm. She had always known that loving a lawman meant accepting the dangers of his profession. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow at first light," Finley replied. "We'll ride north to meet up with a posse from Colorado territory, then track the gang together. How long will you be gone?" Finley shook his head. "Hard to say. A week, maybe 2 if they lead us on a chase. But I promise you this, I will be back in time for our wedding, even if I have to ride day and night to make it." Pearl reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "Just come back safely." "That's all that matters." Finley pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You've faced outlaws with me before," he reminded her. "We finished that fight together. This time I need to know you're safe here while I do my job." "I understand," Pearl assured him. "And I'll be here when you return." The following morning, Pearl stood on the boardwalk outside her store, watching as Finley rode out of town with Marshal Williams and 6 other men. Finley looked back once, raising his hand in farewell, and Pearl waved in return, forcing a smile she didn't entirely feel. As the days passed, Pearl threw herself into wedding preparations and running the store, keeping busy to ward off worry. Harriet and the other women of the town were a constant support, helping with the wedding dress and planning the celebration that would follow the ceremony. A week after Finley's departure, a telegraph arrived from a small settlement 60 miles north. The posse had engaged the outlaw gang in a fierce gunfight. The outlaws had been defeated with 3 dead and 5 captured, but there had been casualties among the lawmen as well. 2 deputies wounded, 1 seriously. The message didn't mention Finley specifically, which Pearl took as a positive sign, but it also didn't confirm his safety. The uncertainty was agonizing. Pearl kept the store open as usual, smiled at customers, and continued her wedding preparations, all while a constant fear gnawed at her heart. Had Finley been injured in the gunfight? Was he even now lying in some remote doctor's office, unable to contact her? Or worse, a possibility she refused to fully contemplate. 10 days after Finley's departure, with still no word from him directly, Pearl closed the store early and walked to the telegraph office. The operator, sympathetic to her anxiety, promised to send an inquiry about Sheriff Blackett's status. "The lines have been down north of here due to a storm," he explained. "But they should be repaired by now. I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything." Pearl thanked him and was about to leave when the door opened behind her. She turned, expecting to see another customer, and instead found herself face to face with Finley. He looked exhausted, his clothing dusty from the trail, and there was a bandage visible at the edge of his collar, but he was standing before her, very much alive. Pearl's relief was so intense it left her momentarily speechless. Finley's face broke into a weary smile. "I promised I'd be back in time for our wedding." Pearl rushed into his arms, heedless of the telegraph operator's presence. "You're hurt," she said, noticing how Finley winced slightly as she embraced him. "Just a scratch," he assured her, echoing his words from their first meeting. "One of the outlaws got lucky with a rifle shot from a distance. It's nothing serious." "Let me be the judge of that," Pearl insisted, stepping back to examine him more carefully. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't much," Finley admitted. "We had to transport the prisoners to the territorial jail in Santa Fe, and I didn't want to waste any more time getting back to you." The telegraph operator cleared his throat discreetly. "I'll cancel that inquiry, Miss Ramirez, seeing as the sheriff is here in person." Pearl thanked him again, then led Finley outside, unwilling to let go of his hand now that he had returned to her. "Are the others back too?" Finley nodded. "Williams and the rest of the posse are right behind me. I rode ahead." He squeezed her hand. "I needed to see you." They walked slowly toward the store, Finley filling her in on the details of the mission. The gang had been cornered in an abandoned mining camp, leading to a standoff that lasted nearly a day before erupting into violence when one of the outlaws tried to escape. In the ensuing gunfight, Finley had been grazed by a bullet that passed through his upper shoulder, but the wound was clean and healing well. "Doctor in Santa Fe patched me up," he assured Pearl. "Said I'll be fine for our wedding, though dancing might be uncomfortable for a while." Pearl unlocked the store and led him through to the stairs leading to her living quarters. "You need rest, a hot meal, and a proper examination of that wound, in that order." Finley didn't argue, which told Pearl more about his exhaustion than his reassurances had. He sat heavily on the sofa in her small sitting room, looking around with appreciation. "You've made some changes." Pearl had indeed personalized the space in the month since moving in, adding colorful curtains, comfortable furnishings, and small touches that reflected her taste. "It's home now," she said simply. She heated water for coffee and prepared a simple meal from the supplies she kept upstairs. As Finley ate, some of the tension seemed to leave his body, though the weariness remained etched in the lines of his face. "Tell me about the wedding plans," he requested. "Give me something pleasant to think about." Pearl sat beside him, describing the arrangements that had been made in his absence: the flowers, the music, the celebration afterward at the hotel dining room. Finley listened with evident pleasure, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions. When he had finished eating, Pearl insisted on checking his wound. The bandage revealed a healing furrow across the top of his shoulder, red and tender looking but without signs of infection. "See, just a scratch," Finley said with a tired smile. "I've had worse." "That's not as reassuring as you think it is," Pearl retorted, carefully rebandaging the injury. "I'd prefer if you avoided getting shot at all. An occupational hazard, I'm afraid." Finley caught her hand as she finished with the bandage. "But one I take more seriously now that I have you to come home to." The simple statement touched Pearl deeply. She leaned forward to kiss him gently, then more deeply as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "I should go," Finley murmured against her lips after several minutes. "People will talk if I stay too long." "Let them," Pearl replied, though she knew he was right. In a small town like Independence, appearances mattered, especially for the sheriff and a respectable business owner. "But you're right. We've waited this long, we can wait a little longer." Finley stood reluctantly, visibly fighting his exhaustion. "2 more weeks," he said, brushing a strand of hair from Pearl's face. "Then no one can say a word about me staying as long as I want." Pearl walked him to the door, already missing his presence though he had only just returned. "Promise me you'll rest. No more chasing outlaws until after the honeymoon." "I promise," Finley said solemnly. "Williams has already insisted I take the next 2 weeks to recover and prepare for the wedding, The most dangerous thing I'll be doing is helping Jenkins repair his chicken coop." Pearl laughed, relief making her feel almost giddy. "I'll hold you to that, Sheriff Blackett." The final 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. Finley recovered quickly from his wound and, true to his word, avoided any situations more dangerous than helping various townspeople with minor repairs and chores. Pearl finished the last alterations on her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk that Harriet had helped her design and sew. The day before the wedding, Pearl's remaining family arrived from Santa Fe, an aunt, and 2 cousins who had survived the fever epidemic that had claimed her parents. Their presence was both a comfort and a bittersweet reminder of those who couldn't be there to witness her happiness. "Your parents would be so proud of you," Aunt Sophia told her as they sat in the living room above the store drinking tea. "And they would approve of your Finley. He has honest eyes." Pearl smiled at this assessment. "He does, doesn't he? And he's a good man, Tia, the best I've known since Papa." "Then you are blessed, Sabrina." Her aunt patted her hand. "To find love twice in one lifetime, first in the family that raised you, and now in the family you will create, that is a rare gift." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a sky of deepest blue and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late summer flowers. Pearl dressed with the help of her aunt and cousins, the ivory silk gown flowing gracefully around her as Harriet carefully arranged a crown of white roses in her dark hair. "You look beautiful, dear," Harriet said, stepping back to admire the effect. "Absolutely radiant." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mayor Thompson, who had offered to escort Pearl to the town hall in the absence of her father. "The whole town's turned out," he informed them. "Haven't seen Independence this dressed up since the railroad celebration." The short journey to the town hall was like a dream to Pearl, the warm greetings of townspeople lining the street, the scattered rose petals marking her path, the music of a violin drifting from the open doors ahead. But all of that faded when she entered the hall and saw Finley waiting for her at the front, handsome in a new black suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love and wonder that Pearl felt her heart might burst with happiness. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to face whatever life brought them together, to support each other through good times and bad, to build a home and family based on love, respect, and partnership. "I never thought I'd find someone who would face danger at my side without flinching," Finley said as he placed the gold band on Pearl's finger. "Someone who would see the man beneath the badge and still choose to love him. You are my courage, my heart, my home." Pearl's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "From the moment we met, you have shown me what it means to be truly brave, not fearless, but willing to act despite fear when something matters enough. You matter to me, Finley. Our life together matters. And I promise to face whatever comes, be it outlaws or ordinary days, always by your side." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from the assembled townspeople nearly drowned out the closing music. Finley kissed Pearl with a tenderness that belied the strength she knew he possessed, and she responded with a promise of her own that whatever life brought them, they would indeed finish it together. The celebration afterward was everything Pearl had hoped for: joyful, inclusive, a true community affair that reflected the life she and Finley had built in Independence. They danced despite Finley's still healing shoulder, shared cake with their guests, and accepted congratulations and good wishes from what seemed like the entire county. As evening approached, they slipped away to begin their wedding trip to Santa Fe, where they would spend a week before returning to their responsibilities in Independence. Finley had arranged for a comfortable rented carriage, packed with everything they would need for the journey. "Happy, Mrs. Blackett?" Finley asked as they left the town behind, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson. Pearl leaned against his uninjured shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "And you, Sheriff Blackett?" Any regrets about trading your bachelor freedom for married life? Finley's arm tightened around her. Only that I didn't meet you sooner. As they traveled south toward Santa Fe, the full moon rose over the desert, casting a silver glow over the landscape. Pearl thought back to that first night when they had faced outlaws under a similar moon and marveled at how far they had come since then. "We'll be at the halfway point soon," Finley commented, following her gaze to the moon. "There's a good camping spot near a spring just ahead." "I thought we might stop there for the night." Pearl agreed readily, looking forward to the privacy after the busy day. They made camp efficiently, working together as they had learned to do in their months of courting. Finley built a small fire while Pearl arranged their bedrolls side by side beneath a canopy of stars. They sat together by the fire, sharing a simple meal and watching the flames dance in the gathering darkness. The desert night was peaceful around them, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird or the distant howl of a coyote. "I've been thinking," Finley said as he poured coffee for them both, "about that land I own at the edge of town." "For our house," Pearl prompted when he paused. "Yes." Finley's expression grew thoughtful, "but also for something more. The territory is growing, Pearl. Independence is growing. People need more than just a general store, they need a place to gather, to connect." Pearl studied his face in the firelight, intrigued by this new direction. "What are you suggesting?" "A hotel," Finley replied. "Nothing fancy, but comfortable. Clean rooms, good food, maybe a proper dining room where people could celebrate special occasions without having to travel to Santa Fe or Albuquerque." "That's quite an undertaking," Pearl observed, though she was already considering the possibilities. "It would require significant investment." "I have savings," Finley said, "and your store is doing well. We wouldn't have to start right away. We could build our house first, get settled. But it's something to think about for the future." Pearl couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "You surprise me, Finley Blackett. I wouldn't have taken you for a budding entrepreneur. Being a sheriff won't last forever," Finley admitted. "It's a young man's job, especially in this territory. I want us to build something lasting together, something that will support our family long after I hang up my badge." The thought touched Pearl deeply. Most men in Finley's position lived for their current role, giving little consideration to what might come after. That he was already planning for their shared future, for the family they hoped to create, only confirmed what she already knew, that she had married a truly exceptional man. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she told him sincerely. "A hotel would be a real asset to independence, and it's something we could build together, just as we've done with our lives." Finley's expression brightened with pleasure at her support. "We'd make a good team. You have the business sense, and I know what travelers need after years on the trail." They talked late into the night, expanding on the idea, imagining the hotel they might create, its appearance, its amenities, the name they might give it. By the time they retired to their bedrolls, the vision had taken solid shape in both their minds. As they lay together beneath the vast desert sky, Pearl nestled in the protective circle of Finley's arms, she felt a profound sense of rightness in her world. The path that had led her to independence had been marked by loss and uncertainty, but it had brought her to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. "I love you, Finley Blackett," she whispered into the quiet night, "and I can't wait to see what we build together." Finley's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple in a gentle caress. "I love you too, Pearl Blackett, more than I have words to say." No more words were needed as they sealed their commitment in the most intimate way, becoming truly husband and wife beneath the watchful moon that had witnessed their first meeting and would now bear witness to the beginning of their shared life. As Pearl drifted towards sleep in her husband's embrace, she thought again of that moment in the desert when they had faced danger together, when Finley had looked at her with determination and said, "We'll finish this together." At the time, she had thought he meant only the immediate threat of the outlaws. Now she understood it had been a promise of something much deeper, much more enduring, a partnership that would face whatever life brought them, always together, always united in purpose and love. And in that knowledge, Pearl found a peace and certainty that would sustain them through all the adventures yet to come.